And now here is news that will shock no one who's been paying attention. Partisan fact checkers are spreading climate change misinformation by falsely labelling correct data as misinformation. Scientist Bjorn Lomborg wrote in the Wall Street Journal recently that partisan fact checkers are undermining open discourse about important issues, including climate change. Earlier this month, I wrote an accurate post on Facebook about the growing polar bear population. The post undercut alarmist climate narratives, so it was wrongly tagged as a falsehood. My goodness. Joining me now is Alex Epstein, author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels and Fossil Future. Alex, these fact checkers are ironically being used to spread misinformation. Why have we allowed these partisan activists to have so much control over what we see and read?
Well, I mean, in the case of the platforms, I think it's up to the platforms, but I do think that Bjorn is doing us a service by publicizing this. I had a similar experience myself a month or so ago. I was looking at Facebook and it said, misinformation about something. And then I looked into it, and this just shows what a hack job it is. The thing they were reporting on as misinformation. They had a whole report, but it was about somebody's comment on my thing. So they couldn't actually refute my thing, which was just documenting that sea levels have gone up and down around the world based on local factors. But they disagreed with a comment, but they labeled my whole thing misinformation. So this is the level of sloppiness. So they should just fire all these fact checkers unless they really have some way to do it, which they definitely don't.
Or just hire people who aren't clearly activists pushing a particular agenda, because that's what these fact-checking agenda has turned into. It's just another partisan way to push a particular narrative and to call it a fact check. Twitter's slowly changing, but Facebook and certainly Instagram are as bad as ever. I even had, Alex, a meme fact-checked, and it was ridiculous because the meme wasn't even inaccurate. It was basically pointing out that despite all the catastrophic predictions about the Great Barrier Reef dying, the reef had a period of massive growth, biggest in decades, and yet that didn't fit the alarmist narrative, so it copped a fact check.
I mean, one thing that's interesting is to look at the claims on the politically correct side that are absurd, that never get fact checked. So one of them that I documented years ago, Bernie Sanders claimed that a certain July was the hottest, he said literally the hottest month in the history of the planet, which if you know anything about the planet, it's been, 13 degrees Celsius warmer at many different points. And he claims it's the hottest. And I just pointed out, hey, why is nobody fact checking this guy? Can you imagine if Donald Trump had said anything equivalent about a different issue? So it just ends up being this very partisan tool that is both has incorrect labels of misinformation, but then it fails to label obvious instances of misinformation. It's a very hard thing to do this. Look, if you're talking about a platform that's reaching billions of people. So I think they should just quit this and pretending that they're going to identify scientific accuracy and inaccuracy across a billion people. They can just let us decide for ourselves, or stop having a politically based policy in any case.
Yes, stop treating their users like they're idiots who need to be told what's what. Now, I want to speak to you about net zero policies. You've argued that not only are net zero agenda destructive and harmful, as we are seeing in many parts of Europe now, with people being plunged into energy poverty, but you also argue that it actually slows the emergence of low-carbon alternatives. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, you have to think of net zero policies as poverty policies. And I know you had on Calvin Robinson, who had that conversation with Greta that was very revealing, right? Where she's like, she can't imagine that net zero policies are responsible for people not being able to afford energy, even though what they do is they restrict fossil fuel energy. Now, just as a point of context, net zero policies have restricted the growth of fossil fuel industry fossil fuel energy, and that plus growing demand has led to a global crisis. But they haven't even succeeded in reducing fossil fuel energy output, and they've still caused a disaster. And we're talking about net zero by 2050. So that would literally, and I mean this literally, this would be literally the most destructive thing that human beings have ever done in terms of loss of life if we actually tried to do net zero by 2050. Because we totally need to emit CO2 to live for the foreseeable future. We don't have any scalable way of capturing all the CO2. We have no way of replacing fossil fuels in a world that needs far more energy. So imagine what would happen to low carbon energy, like developing fission and fusion and solar and wind. If fossil fuels are astronomically expensive and everyone is starving, you think we're going to be installing magical amounts of solar and wind and batteries that currently we don't even know how to do? It's just being totally impoverished does not lead to innovation. That's why all the innovation happens in the wealthier places. It doesn't happen in sub-Saharan Africa, because when you're poor, you don't have the time and resources to innovate.
Absolutely. I spoke late last year to Jordan Peterson about what he calls the climate pseudo-religion. I want to ask you about this, because I know you've thought about this a lot yourself. These climate catastrophists, the ones who've got this religious-like zealotry about their agenda, and they make these false predictions of doom and gloom. Are they essentially anti-human? Do they see man's impact on the world as inherently evil and only evil?
I think yes. I mean, I really argue this extensively in Fossil Future Chapter 3, and I've talked about this with Jordan quite a bit on his show, and then he mentioned it the other day on Joe Rogan's show, this specific thing, and he mentioned Fossil Future as well. I mean, I think it comes down to one idea, which is that human impact is bad, and this has two components: that it's intrinsically immoral, so we just shouldn't impact Earth, and then it's inevitably self-destructive. So if we do impact Earth will punish us. And I think people can see this has a religious type format to it. It's saying basically the number one commandment is thou shalt not impact Earth. And if we sin against Earth, it's bad. And then the idea is that the Earth God is going to punish us. That's really what climate catastrophe is. There's no basis for thinking, hey, we're safer than ever from climate disaster. We've been emitting CO2 for 100 years. We've been getting all this energy. Life is getting better. Again, we're safer from climate, but it's all going to end in 30 years. It makes no sense logically. Oh, it's going to get a degree warmer. We can't handle that. It makes no sense. But if you view it as a religion, and it's this apocalypse narrative punishing us for our sins, that's what really leads to the catastrophism. So it's a combination of the view that it's wrong, and then also that the Earth is what I call this delicate nurturer. I think Jordan calls it something like a fragile virgin, that if we impact it, it's just going to get destroyed. And that's a anti-human religious narrative. It has nothing to do with science.